Jake Morrison stood on the metal platform looking down at the blue waters below. The ocean stretched out as far as he could see, with small islands dotting the horizon like green jewels. This was Aquarius Prime, a water world used by the Galactic Naval Academy for survival training. Jake had been waiting for this day since he first arrived at the Academy 6 months ago. The platform buzzed with nervous energy as cadets from 12 different species prepared for the exercise. Jake watched his fellow students and felt small. Among them, the Krathan cadets stood 8 feet tall with thick gray skin that could stop laser blasts. The Vex had 4 arms and could solve math problems faster than computers. The Zephyrians could fly without any equipment at all. And then there was Jake, a human from Earth, standing just under 6 feet tall with nothing special about him except his stubborn refusal to quit. Commander Veltar, a blue-skinned Aquarian with gills on his neck, stepped forward. His voice carried. Across the platform through the translation devices all cadets wore. Today you will work in mixed teams of 4. Your goal is simple. Travel from island to island using only basic tools and teamwork. The first team to reach the final checkpoint wins extra credits. The last team cleans the academy bathrooms for a month. Jake heard groans from several cadets. Cleaning bathrooms was bad enough when they were designed for your own species. Cleaning ones made for 12 different types of beings was truly punishment. Team assignments are final, Commander Veltar continued. No changes, no complaints. Morrison, Jake, you will work with Zixtel of the Crystal Territories, Kira of the Hive, Worlds, and Vorth of the Gas Giants. Jake's stomach dropped. He knew these 3 cadets by reputation. Zixtel was brilliant, but had never seen an ocean before coming to the academy. Her people lived on desert worlds where water was more precious than gold. Kira came from a species that breathed through holes in her shell-like body and could not swim at all. Vorth needed a special breathing mask because the air on most worlds would poison him within minutes. Jake walked over to where his new teammates were gathering. Zixtel looked like a living crystal sculpture, her body made of clear blue stone that caught the sunlight and threw rainbows in all directions. She was beautiful, but Jake could see worry in her gem-like eyes as she stared at the water. Kira stood next to her, clicking her mandibles nervously. Her insect-like body was covered in hard green plates that gleamed like armor. 6 legs kept her perfectly balanced, but Jake knew those same legs would drag her straight to the bottom if she fell in the water. Earth was the strangest of all. His body looked like it was made of smoke and air, shifting between solid and gas. As Jake watched, a clear mask covered what might have been his face, and tubes connected it to a tank on his back. When the mask got wet, it fogged up, and Vorth could not see or breathe properly. So, Jake said, trying to sound confident, looks like we are working together. I am Jake. This is most concerning, Zixtel said, her voice like wind chimes in a breeze. I have studied the theory of water displacement and buoyancy, but I have never experienced these phenomena personally. My homeworld has no bodies of water larger than what you would call a swimming pool. Kira's mandibles clicked faster. My people sink like stones. We evolved in low gravity with no oceans. This exercise seems designed to eliminate us from the program. Vorth's voice came out muffled through his breathing apparatus. Water damage to my life support system would be fatal. Perhaps we should request a different assignment. Jake looked at his teammates and then at the other groups forming around them. The Krathan team looked confident and strong. The Vex team was already calculating optimal routes between islands. The Zephyrian team could simply fly if things went wrong. Listen, Jake said, I know this looks bad, but humans have been dealing with water for thousands of years. My planet is mostly ocean. I grew up near the coast and spent every summer swimming and sailing. Let me help you guys with this. Commander Veltar's voice boomed across the platform. Again, teams will be transported to your starting islands now. You have basic supplies waiting for you there. Use them wisely. The exercise begins in 1 hour. Weather reports show clear skies for the next 2 days. Jake felt better hearing about the clear weather. He had been watching the clouds on the horizon, and they looked a little too dark for his comfort. But the Academy's weather systems were much better than anything on Earth. If they said clear skies, it would probably be clear skies. Transport. Shuttles arrived and began taking teams to their assigned starting points. Jake's team climbed aboard a small craft piloted by a mechanical drone. As they flew over the water, Jake pointed out things he thought might be useful. See how the waves are moving? That tells us which way the wind is blowing. And look at those birds flying in formation. They know where the fish are, which means they know where the shallow water is. Birds are smart about these things. Zixtel listened carefully and took notes on a crystal tablet. Kira seemed less nervous now that Jake was explaining things. Even Vorth appeared interested, though it was hard to tell through his mask. Their starting island was small, maybe half a mile across, covered with trees and surrounded by a beach of white sand. The shuttle dropped them off along with their supply crates and flew away, leaving them alone with the sound of waves and wind. Jake opened the supply crates while his teammates explored the beach. Inside he found rope, a knife, some basic tools, emergency food packets, and water purification tablets. Standard survival gear, nothing fancy, but enough to work with if you knew what you were doing. The next island is about 2 miles that way, Jake said, pointing across the water. We need to figure out how to get everyone there safely. Zixtel knelt by the water's edge and touched it carefully with one crystal finger. It is much warmer than I expected, and the salt content is higher than our simulations indicated. Kira tested the sand with her feet. This surface is unstable. How do creatures move efficiently on such shifting ground? Vorth was examining some driftwood that had washed up on the beach. This organic material shows interesting decomposition patterns. Perhaps it could be useful for construction purposes. Jake smiled. His teammates might not know about oceans, but they were smart and observant. They could learn fast if he taught them well. Okay, he said, let me show you guys some things about water and boats and staying safe on islands. We have an hour before the exercise starts officially, so let us use that time to practice and plan. The afternoon sun was warm on their backs as Jake began teaching his alien teammates about the ocean. He showed Zixtel how to read the waves and currents. He taught Kira how to move on sand without sinking in. He helped Vorth understand how wind and water worked together. As they worked, Jake felt a small change in the air pressure and glanced up at the sky. Those clouds on the horizon looked a little bigger now, and they seemed to be moving faster than before. But the Academy had said clear weather, and their instruments were far better than anything a human could sense. Jake pushed the worry aside and focused on his team. They had work to do. The official start of the exercise came with a loud horn blast that echoed across the water. Jake and his team had spent their preparation hour well. Zixtel now understood how to balance her weight when moving near water. Kira had learned to stay on firm sand and avoid the soft spots that would trap her legs. Vorth had waterproofed his breathing equipment with materials from their supply kit. Jake had also taught them how to work together to build a simple raft. They used fallen branches from the island's trees, tied together with rope from their supplies. It was not beautiful, but it would float and carry all 4 of them safely to the next island. Remember what I showed you about staying calm in the water, Jake said as they pushed their raft into the shallow waves. If anyone falls off, do not panic. I will get you back on board. The first crossing went smoothly. Jake used a long branch as a paddle while his teammates sat carefully in the positions he had assigned them. Zixtel was in the front where her sharp eyes could watch for rocks or shallow areas. Kira sat in the middle where her weight would help keep the raft stable. Vorth was in the back where he could help Jake steer. They reached the second island just as another team was leaving it. The Krathen team had built something that looked more like a warship than a raft, with thick logs and metal reinforcement. They moved fast through the water, but Jake noticed they were not paying attention to the currents and were working much harder than they needed to. Efficiency over power, Jake told his team as they pulled their raft onto the beach. Let them waste their energy fighting the ocean. We will work with it instead. The second island was larger than their starting point, with hills in the center and several small bays around the edges. Their next checkpoint was on an island about 3 miles away, across deeper water with stronger currents. As they explored and gathered more materials, Jake kept glancing at the sky. The clouds he had noticed earlier were definitely bigger now, and they had turned from white to gray. The wind was picking up too, making the palm trees sway and whistle. "Jake," Zixtel said, following his gaze upward, "you seem concerned about the atmospheric conditions." Our briefing indicated favorable weather for the duration of the exercise. "I know what they said," Jake replied, watching a line of dark clouds moving across the horizon. "But where I come from, we learned to read the sky for ourselves. Those clouds are moving fast, and they are getting darker. That usually means trouble." Kira clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. "Your species evolved on a world with unpredictable weather patterns. Perhaps your instincts are more accurate than our technological predictions." Vorth's voice was muffled but worried. "Should we contact the Academy and report a potential weather hazard?" Jake tried his communication device, but only static came. Through, he frowned and checked the settings. Everything looked correct, but the signal was completely blocked. "That is strange," he said. "These things are supposed to work anywhere on the planet." Around the same time, teams on other islands were discovering the same problem. Their communication equipment was not working. The advanced technology they all depended on was failing just when they might need it most. Jake's team finished building a larger, stronger raft for the longer crossing ahead. This time Jake added higher sides and a small shelter in the center where Vorth could protect his breathing equipment from spray and wind. As they prepared to launch, the first drops of rain began to fall. They were warm and light at first, but Jake could tell more was coming. The clouds overhead were now dark gray, almost black in places, and they stretched from horizon to horizon. "We need to move now," Jake said urgently. "If we wait, this storm is going to trap us here." "But the exercise protocols suggest waiting for optimal conditions," Zixtel said, looking uncertain. "The exercise protocols were written for normal weather," Jake replied, pushing the raft into the water. "This is not normal weather, trust me on this." They launched their raft just as the wind began to pick up seriously. Jake had to work much harder with his paddle to keep them moving in the right direction. The waves were getting bigger, and their raft rode up and down like a roller coaster halfway to their destination. The real storm hit. Rain came down like a waterfall, so heavy that Jake could barely see the island they were heading toward. The wind howled and pushed their raft sideways, away from their planned course. Waves that had been 2 feet tall were now 4 feet, then 6 feet, crashing over the sides of their raft and soaking everyone aboard. Zixtel's crystal body began to make strange cracking sounds as the temperature dropped and the rain hit her. Kira's breathing holes were getting clogged with water, making her gasp and struggle for air. Vorth's mask was fogging up so badly he could not see anything, and water was getting into his breathing system despite Jake's waterproofing efforts. "Hold on," Jake shouted over the wind. "We are almost there." But even as he said it, Jake could see they were in serious trouble. The storm was much worse than he had expected, and it was getting stronger by the minute. This was not just a little rain shower. This was a full tropical storm, the kind that could sink ships and flood islands. Lightning began flashing in the clouds above them, followed by thunder that shook the air. With each lightning strike, Jake could see other rafts in the distance, all struggling with the same impossible conditions. They finally reached the third island, but landing was almost as dangerous as the crossing had been. Waves crashed against the rocky shore, and Jake had to time their approach perfectly to avoid being smashed against the rocks. When they finally dragged their raft onto the beach, all 4 team members were exhausted and soaked. But Jake's worries were just beginning. The rain was not stopping. If anything, it was getting heavier. "We need shelter," Jake said, looking around the island, "and we need it fast." But as they explored, Jake realized something terrifying. This island was much lower than the others they had visited. The highest point was maybe 10 feet above sea level, and the water was rising. Storm surge, Jake thought. remembering stories his grandfather had told him about hurricanes back on Earth. When a big storm hits, it does not just bring rain, it pushes the ocean itself onto the land. Jake looked at his teammates, who were huddled together trying to stay warm and dry. They had no idea what was coming. Their species had never faced anything like this, but Jake had grown up hearing stories about storms like this. He knew what storm surge could do to low-lying islands. He knew they were all in deadly danger. The exercise was no longer about winning or losing, it was about survival. And Jake was the only one who understood just how bad things were about. To get as if to prove his point, a wave larger than any they had seen before crashed onto the beach, reaching almost to where they stood. The ocean was coming for their island, and there was nowhere higher to run. Jake looked at his frightened teammates and made a decision. The Academy's weather prediction had been wrong. Their communication equipment had failed. Their advanced technology could not help them now. But Jake was human, and humans had survived storms like this for thousands of years. Somehow, he was going to get his team through this alive. The water kept rising. What had started as waves washing onto the beach was now a steady flood creeping inland. Jake watched in growing alarm as the ocean claimed more of their small island with each passing minute. "This cannot be happening," Zixtel said, her crystal voice cracking like breaking glass. "The Academy's weather systems are the most advanced in the galaxy. They predicted clear skies." Jake knelt by the water's edge and stuck his finger into the rising tide. It was warm, much warmer than it should be, and it tasted different too. More salt, and something else he could not identify. "Sometimes the best technology gets it wrong," Jake said grimly. "My grandmother used to say that nature does not read the weather reports." Another wave crashed inland, reaching their ankles now. Kira made a panicked clicking sound as the water touched her feet. Her breathing holes began to whistle and wheeze as moisture got inside them. "I cannot function in these conditions," she gasped. "My respiratory system is not designed for high humidity. Each breath is becoming more difficult." Vorth was struggling too. His breathing mask had fogged up completely, and water was dripping from his life support equipment. The tubes connecting his mask to his air tank were making gurgling sounds that Jake was pretty sure were not normal. "My atmospheric processor is failing," Vorth said, his voice barely audible through the mask. "If water gets into the main tank, I will have perhaps 10 minutes before the gas mixture becomes toxic to my physiology." Jake looked around desperately. The highest point on the island was a small hill maybe 50 yards away, but it was only about 10 feet above sea level. At the rate the water was rising, it would be underwater within an hour. Through the rain and wind, Jake could hear voices. From other islands, shouts, calls for help, sounds of panic. The communication equipment was still dead, but sound carried across the water. Other teams were facing the same crisis, and they were just as unprepared as his own team had been. "Listen," Jake said, trying to keep his voice calm even though his heart was racing. "We need to get to higher ground right now. Grab anything useful from our supplies and follow me." They splashed through the rising water toward the hill in the center of the island. Jake carried their rope and tools while his teammates struggled with their own equipment. Zixtel's crystal body was making constant, cracking sounds now as the temperature changes and moisture stressed her molecular structure. Kira moved slowly, her breathing becoming more labored with each step. Vorth stumbled frequently, unable to see clearly through his fogged mask. When they reached the hilltop, Jake could see the full scope of their situation. Islands that had been clearly visible an hour ago were now just tiny spots of land poking above the waves. Some had disappeared completely. "Dear crystalline ancestors," Zixtel whispered. "The water level has risen at least 12 feet. This is impossible according to all known oceanographic principles." "Not impossible," Jake said, remembering his grandfather's stories about Hurricane Katrina. "This is storm surge. When a big storm pushes across the ocean, it does not just bring wind and rain. It pushes the water itself ahead of it like a wall." Kira's mandibles chattered with fear. "How long will it continue to rise?" Jake studied the dark sky and the pattern of the waves. I do not know. Maybe another hour, maybe more. It depends on how big this storm really is. A voice drifted across the water from a nearby island. Someone was screaming for help. Jake squinted through the rain and could make out figures on what looked like a piece of floating debris. Another team's island had already gone completely underwater. We have to help them, Jake said, but even as he spoke, he knew it was impossible. They had no boat, no way to reach the other team, and their own situation was getting worse by the minute. Vorth suddenly collapsed, his breathing apparatus making horrible gurgling sounds. Jake rushed to his side and saw that water had gotten into the main air tank. The gas mixture that kept Vorth alive was being contaminated. I'm dying, Vorth gasped. My people cannot survive in this atmosphere without proper filtration, Jake's mind raced. He remembered something from his basic first aid training back on Earth. When people were drowning, you could sometimes save them by getting the water out of their lungs and giving them mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. But Vorth was not drowning in water. He was drowning in the wrong kind of air. Zixtal, Kira, help me, Jake ordered. We need to build some kind of shelter to protect Vorth's equipment from the rain. Working together, they used their remaining supplies to create a small lean-to structure. Jake used his knife to cut holes in their emergency food containers, creating makeshift funnels to channel rainwater away from Vorth's life support system. It was not perfect, but it gave Vorth's equipment a chance to dry out and function properly. Within a few minutes, his breathing became easier and his mask cleared up enough for him to see. Thank you, Vorth said weakly. I believe you may have saved my life. But their relief was short-lived. The water was still rising, and now it was lapping at the base of their hill. Jake estimated they had maybe 30 minutes before their refuge would be underwater too. What do we do now? Kira asked, her voice high with panic. My people are not swimmers. If this hill floods, I will sink like a stone. Zixtal was examining her own crystal structure with growing alarm. The thermal stress is causing fractures throughout my body. I estimate that complete structural failure will occur within 2 hours if these conditions continue. Jake closed his eyes and tried to think. His teammates were all looking at him like he had answers, but the truth was that he was just as scared as they were. The difference was that he had grown up hearing stories about situations like this. He knew that people could survive floods and storms if they were smart and worked together. We need a boat, Jake said finally. Something big enough to carry all of us and strong enough to handle these waves. With what materials? Zixtal asked. We have rope, basic tools, and whatever debris we can find on this island. That is hardly sufficient for constructing a seaworthy vessel. Jake looked around at what they had to work with. Palm trees, some fallen branches, their supply containers, and various pieces of junk that had washed up on the beach. It was not much, but people had built boats with less. My great-grandfather survived a flood in Louisiana with nothing but some oil drums and wooden planks, Jake said. If he could do it, we can do it. Another cry for help echoed across the water, closer this time. Jake could see a group of cadets clinging to what looked like a partially submerged log. They were from the Krathen team, the big strong ones who had seemed so confident earlier. Even the Krathen are in trouble, Kira observed. If their superior strength cannot save them, what hope do we have? Strength is not everything, Jake said, already moving toward the trees. Sometimes being smart is better than being strong. Sometimes knowing how to work with nature is better than trying to fight it. He started gathering materials, his mind working through the design of a raft that could save not just his own team, but maybe some of the others too. It would be the biggest challenge of his life. But Jake was beginning to understand something important. All his life, he had felt weak compared to the other species at the academy. The Krathen were stronger, the Vex were smarter, the Zephyrians were faster. But none of them had grown up on a world where survival meant understanding water and weather and working with whatever materials you could find for the first time. Since arriving at the academy, Jake realized that being human might actually be an advantage. Jake moved with purpose, gathering materials while the water continued its relentless rise up the hillside. He had maybe 20 minutes before their refuge would be completely underwater, but his mind was calm now. This was what humans did. They adapted, they improvised, they survived. Kira, I need you to use your strength to break off those palm fronds, Jake called out. The big ones, as many as you can carry. Zixtal, can you use your sharp edges to cut rope into specific lengths? His teammates responded immediately, grateful to have something useful to do instead of just waiting to drown. Vorth, still weak, but breathing properly now, began collecting the empty supply containers. What is your plan? Zixtal asked as she sliced through rope with surgical precision. We are going to build a life raft, Jake explained, dragging a fallen tree trunk toward their work area. Not just for us, but big enough to rescue others too. Jake had been thinking about this while watching his teammates panic. Every species at the academy had different strengths, but they all had the same weakness right now. None of them understood water the way humans did. The Krathen were incredibly strong, but their dense muscle mass made them sink like rocks. The Vex could calculate optimal survival strategies in seconds, but they had no practical experience with emergency construction. The Zephyrians could fly, but their hollow bones made them fragile in rough water. Humans were different. They had evolved on a planet where survival often meant building things quickly with whatever materials were available. Jake's ancestors had crossed oceans in boats made from animal skins and tree branches. They had survived floods, storms, and shipwrecks for thousands of years. Now it was Jake's turn to prove that human ingenuity was worth something. He positioned the large tree trunk as the central spine of his raft, then began lashing smaller logs to it with rope. The key was distribution of weight and buoyancy. Each of his teammates had different needs, and Jake designed specific sections of the raft for each of them. For Zixtal, he created a raised platform covered with palm fronds to keep her crystal body dry and stable. For Kira, he built a secure harness system that would prevent her from sliding into the water even if the raft tipped. For Vorth, he constructed a partially enclosed shelter to protect his breathing equipment from spray and rain. This is remarkable, Zixtal said, watching Jake work. You are creating a multi-species survival platform using only primitive materials and basic tools? My people have been doing this for a long time, Jake said, testing the strength of his rope knots. We call it making do with what you have. As he worked, Jake could hear more voices calling for help across the water. The storm was affecting every team in the exercise, and most of them were probably in worse shape than his group. The Academy's rescue ships could not operate in this weather, which meant the cadets were on their own until the storm passed. Jake finished the basic structure of his raft just as the water reached their feet on the hilltop. It was time to test his construction. Everyone on board, he said, carefully in the positions I showed you. They launched the raft into the rising flood, and Jake felt a surge of pride as it rode the waves smoothly. His design worked. The raft was stable, each teammate was secure, and there was room for more passengers. Jake, Kira said, pointing across the choppy water, there are cadets in the water over there. Jake could see them too. 3 figures clinging to a piece of debris that was barely keeping them afloat. They were maybe 100 yards away, but the current was pulling them farther out into deeper water. Hold on, Jake said, grabbing his makeshift paddle. We are going after them. Navigating the raft through the storm-tossed water was the hardest thing Jake had ever done. The wind pushed them sideways, waves crashed over the bow, and visibility was almost zero through the driving rain. But Jake had learned to read water from his father, who had learned it from his father before him. Human instincts that had been passed down through generations guided him through the chaos. They reached the drowning cadets just in time. 2 Vex and 1 Zephyrian, all exhausted and barely conscious. Jake hauled them aboard his raft one by one, his teammates helping to secure the new passengers. How did you find us? One of the Vex gasped. Humans are good at this stuff, Jake said simply, with 6 passengers now. The raft rode lower in the water, but Jake's design held. He had built it with extra capacity, knowing that rescue situations always required more room than you initially planned for. There, Vorth pointed through his cleared mask. More survivors on that floating debris. Jake could see another group in the distance, but reaching them would mean fighting the current and the wind. His raft was strong, but it was not fast. And the storm was getting worse. We can make it, Jake decided. Everyone hold tight. The second rescue was even more difficult. 4 Krathan cadets were clinging to what remained of their massive raft, which had broken apart in the heavy seas. Despite their great strength, they were helpless in the water. Climb aboard, Jake called out. There is room for everyone. 1. Of the Krathan, a cadet named Gorvik looked skeptical. Your vessel appears insufficient to support our mass. We weigh considerably more than other species. I built it to handle your weight, Jake assured him. Trust me. The Krathan climbed aboard cautiously, but Jake's calculations proved correct. The raft settled deeper, but remained stable and seaworthy. Now, Jake had 10 passengers on his emergency vessel, representing 5 different species. The raft was crowded but functional, and everyone was safe for the moment. This is incredible, one of the Vex said, studying Jake's construction with professional interest. The engineering principles you have employed are both simple and elegant. How did you calculate the proper ratios of buoyancy to payload? I did not calculate anything, Jake admitted. I just know what works. My people have been building boats for thousands of years, without mathematical analysis? The Vex asked, sounding shocked. Sometimes experience is better than equations. Jake said. As they rode out the storm on Jake's raft, his passengers began to understand something important about humans. They might not be the strongest or the smartest or the fastest species in the galaxy, but they had something else. They had the ability to adapt and survive in situations where advanced technology failed. Jake kept scanning the water for more. Survivors? The exercise had started with dozens of teams, and he could only imagine how many cadets were still out there, struggling in the storm. We need to keep looking, he told his passengers. No one gets left behind. It was a very human thing to say, and as the words left his mouth, Jake realized that this was what made his species special. Not their strength or their intelligence, but their refusal to give up on each other. No matter how bad things got. The storm raged on, but Jake's raft held together, keeping all 10 cadets safe as they searched the dark waters for anyone else who needed help. The storm raged for 3 more hours, but Jake's raft became a beacon of hope in the chaos. Word spread somehow among the scattered survivors that a human cadet had built a rescue vessel and was pulling cadets from the water. By the time the rain finally stopped and the winds calmed, Jake had rescued 17 cadets from 6 different species. His raft, designed for 4 passengers, now carried a small floating community. Everyone was cramped, exhausted, and soaked, but they were alive. Jake had proven something that no one at the academy had expected. The human, considered one of the weakest cadets in the program, had saved more lives than any other single individual during the crisis. Look, Kira said, pointing toward the horizon. The academy rescue ships are coming. 3 sleek vessels approached through the clearing, whether their hulls gleaming in the first sunlight they had seen all day. Jake felt a mixture of relief and pride as the lead ship pulled. Alongside his makeshift raft, Commander Veltar himself was aboard the rescue vessel, his blue face showing surprise as he counted the survivors on Jake's raft. Cadet Morrison, report. How many individuals did you rescue? 17, sir, Jake replied, plus my original team members. Everyone is accounted for and in stable condition. 17, the commander repeated, making notes on his tablet. And you constructed this vessel yourself using only standard survival supplies? Yes, sir, with help from my teammates. Commander Veltar studied the raft with professional interest. The design was crude by Academy standards, but it had clearly worked. This is most unusual, Cadet Morrison. How did you know to begin rescue operations when all communication systems were non-functional? Jake thought about that for a moment. I guess it just seemed like the right thing to do, sir. Where I come from, when people are in trouble in the water, you go help them. That is what humans do. The rescue ships brought all the survivors back to the academy, where medical teams were waiting to treat exposure and injuries. Jake's alien teammates were fine, though Zixtal would need some time for her crystal structure to heal, and Vorth's breathing equipment required complete replacement. As the cadets were processed through medical screening, word of Jake's actions spread throughout the academy. Other survivors told their stories, and a clear picture emerged of what had happened during the storm. The weather prediction systems had failed due to unusual magnetic interference from solar activity. The communication networks had been disrupted by the same phenomenon. For 6 hours, the cadets had been completely on their own, facing conditions that none of them had trained for. Most teams had simply tried to wait out the storm, but rising water levels had made that impossible. Several groups had attempted to build rafts, but their designs had failed in the rough seas. The Krathen team's heavy construction had broken apart. The Vex team's mathematically perfect raft had been too rigid to handle the waves. The Zephyrian team had tried to fly through the storm, and had been forced down into the water. Only Jake had succeeded in building a vessel that could handle both the storm conditions and the rescue mission that followed. 3 days later, Jake was called to the Academy's main conference room. He expected a debriefing session, but instead he found the entire senior staff waiting for him, along with representatives from several galactic governments. "Cadet Morrison," said Admiral Korthax, the Academy's commanding officer, "your actions during the training exercise have been reviewed by this board. We find your performance to be exemplary and worthy of special recognition." Jake stood at attention, not sure what to say. "More importantly," the Admiral continued, "your actions have forced us to reconsider our evaluation methods for human cadets. It appears we have been measuring your species by the wrong standards." A Vex official stepped forward. "Our mathematical models indicated that humans possessed inferior survival capabilities compared to other Academy species. Your performance during the storm crisis suggests these models were incomplete. Humans demonstrate survival traits that our simulations did not account for," added a Krathen representative. "Adaptability, improvisation, and what you call intuition. These are valuable military assets," Admiral Korthax nodded. "Effective immediately, the Academy's curriculum will be updated to include human survival techniques. You will serve as an instructor for water survival and emergency construction methods." Jake blinked in surprise. "Me, sir? But I am just a first-year cadet." "You are a cadet who saved 17 lives using nothing but rope and driftwood," the Admiral replied. "That makes you uniquely qualified to teach others." Over the following weeks, Jake found himself in a strange new position at the Academy. The same cadets who had looked down on him for being weak now came to him for lessons on survival skills. He taught them how to read weather patterns, how to build emergency shelters, and how to work with natural materials. Most importantly, he taught them that intelligence was not just about calculating the right answer. Sometimes it was about knowing what to do when all the calculations failed. Zixtal became one of his most dedicated students. "I have learned that theoretical knowledge is insufficient," she told him. "Your people possess practical wisdom that my species lacks." Kira agreed. "Humans see solutions where we see only problems. This is a valuable perspective." Even Vorth, whose life Jake had directly saved, became an advocate for human survival methods. "Technical systems fail," he said, "but human ingenuity endures." The storm exercise became a legendary story at the Academy, told and retold by cadets from many different worlds. It was the day when everyone learned that the smallest, weakest cadet in the program was actually one of the most valuable. Jake's parents back on Earth were amazed when they received the Academy's official report of their son's actions. His father, a fisherman who had taught Jake about boats and weather, felt proud but not surprised. "That boy grew up on the water," his father told reporters. "He knows how to handle himself when things get rough. That is just what humans do." And that, Jake realized, was the point. Humans might not be the strongest or smartest species in the galaxy, but they had something else. They had the ability to keep going when everything went wrong, to find solutions where others saw only problems, and to risk their own safety to help others. In a universe full of advanced technology and powerful alien species, sometimes the most important trait was simply refusing to give up. And humans, Jake had learned, were very good at not giving up. The exercise that was supposed to test teamwork and navigation had instead become a demonstration of human value in the galactic community. Jake Morrison, the weak human cadet, had shown that his species deserved respect not despite their limitations, but because of how they overcame them. When the next storm came, the Academy would be ready. And they would be ready because a human had shown them how to build a raft that could carry everyone to safety, no matter how rough the waters got.